Okay, welcome back to Morning Joe, top of the hour.
And so, yeah, I was going to say, Jeffrey Sachs has a good start. Okay.
Yeah.
Boy, what was this? What was the line in Anchorman? Boy, that deteriorated fast.
Well,
stay classy.
It depends on how you want to play
Classy
it.
San Diego.
All right, yeah.
Okay.
Somebody ought to listen to that. Dr. Jeffrey Sachs is still with us, and joining the table, Republican Governor from Virginia, Bob McDonnell, and hi there, good to have you, former Democratic Congressman from Tennessee, and now an MSNBC political analyst and visiting professor at NYU.
Oh,
absolutely.
Professor Harold Ford.
Professor, let me ask you a question.
Professor.
We got to ask you a couple questions from last
us.
hour, okay? Teach us.
Please.
Teach me love.
We need to be educated.
Number one, first of all, you're President of the United States. If you're going to call somebody's budget plan un-American, do you invite them to sit on the front row and then insult them as sort of your opening salvo for budget negotiations?
I think you certainly invite your adversaries and those who may disagree with that. I didn't see any problem with that.
Yeah, no problem with that.
Not at all.
You don't think that might mess up negotiations down the road?
Well, I mean, Boehner yesterday
saying he's not serious.
Boehner yesterday said that taxes were completely off the table. So I don't think that's an honest negotiating starting point. You and I discussed that yesterday. So I don't think anything is wrong. I think it's civil. And you all talk about an issue all the time.
Exactly.
You're able to have this conversation. It's robust. It's sometimes a little
maybe
loud,
it's just a lawyer in me. But I'll tell you what, whenever we had mediations, the two clients started to personally insult each other, saying the other wasn't serious. We would drag them and pull them into other rooms.
He didn't say that.
Well,
he didn't say that Paul was un-American. He said the plan was un-American.
He said Paul's plan was un-American.
Right.
And I think even more insulting was the fact he wasn't serious. Now listen, this is hardball. This is tough. And I got no problems with anything the president said about Ryan or what Ryan says about the president's plan. I'm just saying maybe you don't invite him to sit on the front row of your speech, which is a grand gesture, and then whacking. Now let's go to the other side really quick.
Yeah, you
I probably would have done it differently. But
really, I know you would.
I don't think there's anything.
And quickly on the other side, and Governor, let me ask you this. I know you may not want to wade into this territory.
Feel free to not.
Thanks for the pass right away.
I am giving you this.
If you want your ratings to stay up, you better stay.
66%. Now that's just
He's
gaudy.
not doing badly.
That is gaudy.
Bob for jobs.
But anyway,
Okay.
Bob's for jobs. Anyway, Governor, Republicans woke up this morning stunned.
Unlike Joe Biden.
Unlike Joe Biden, stunned to find out that the $38 billion that John Boehner and Republican leaders had promised them.
A couple weeks of interest.
Yeah. Ends up, the CBO says, well, actually, in the end, they only actually cut about $350 million from this year's budget. You think that's going to make things harder for these young freshman Republicans, these hardcore conservatives, to trust leadership in the future?
Well, I think this battle was just a very small discussion anyway. Whether it's 38 or 61, it's only talking about discretionary domestic spending. And with $1.5 trillion in deficit and a $14 trillion national debt, it's nothing anyway. This was the very first discussion of a longer battle about what does the next budget look like and what do we do about the debt ceiling in the future. So regardless of the actual number, this was really a small first salvo in the long discussion about how do we cut spending and how do we get our nation back on track.
So as a conservative guy, do you agree with me that even though we Republicans usually go after domestic discretionary spending first, that there's no way we're going to take care of our debt problems by just going into the small sliver of the budget and tearing it to shreds? That in fact, it's counterproductive.
Absolutely. It's 12% of the budget. And unless you have the guts to tell the American people you've got to go after reducing entitlements in a fair and balanced way, we're never going to reduce this $14 trillion that I think is an unsustainable and immoral level of debt on our kids. So, we did that in Virginia. We're down to 2006 spending levels. We cut education, we cut health care last year. But I told the people, look, if we don't do this, we're not going to be competitive, and we're not going to get ourselves out of this this problem. We're not going to raise taxes. And 6 months later, we had a surplus. And I think we can do that at the national level. Just be honest and say, if we don't do this, we're going to be a long-term debtor nation, and we're going to sacrifice our prosperity.
I want to get to your great record in Virginia. Bob is for jobs. Unemployment very low. But first, I want Dr. Sachs to weigh in because Jeffrey Sachs believes, like a lot of people, a lot of economists believe, that, yes, you're going to have to slow down the rate of growth for entitlements, but you're also going to have to go after taxes.
I was just wondering, I mean, at the state level, you make one decision, but do you really think that it could conceivably be right that at the federal level that all of this is done without any tax increases on the rich? I find that impossible statistically. I mean, do you think it's possible?
I do.
You do?
Yeah, because it's going to take a little longer, perhaps. But you know, when you look at what governors have to do with balanced budget amendments, we think the way they're managing things in Washington is foreign to our thinking. We have to balance the budget every year, on time, and we have to do it with a limited debt ceiling under our Constitution. So, and we can't do CRs every year to move things down the road. And that's what Americans do in their business and their families. So these CRs and pushing the debt ceiling out is really a foreign way of thinking, I think, to governors and to the average citizen.
Yeah, I think at the state level, you know, you may make one decision, but at the federal level, we have the rich enjoying wealth and income levels that they've never seen in history, and then people suffering at the bottom. And the idea that this is going to be done just by cutting programs for the middle class and poor seems to me to be impossible. What kind of country really would it be? You know, for a state that's competing with other states for jobs and who's going to move where you're going to locate, you make a certain decision. But when we're talking about the country as a whole, we've never seen the wealth at the top. We see it on Wall Street, record profits yesterday of J.P. Morgan. Is it really going to be that we let the rich have more wealth, higher share of national income than they've ever had in our nation's history, and walk away with that?
Well, Jeffrey, I think we ought to celebrate that success.
I don't see how we celebrate it when people are suffering. 90% of the public suffering, though, Governor.
But that's the American dream.
It's not for 90%. It's the American nightmare. With all due
That's what
respect.
we want to achieve. That's what we want to celebrate and encourage in America is more entrepreneurship.
We bailed those guys out. Half of them should be in jail, perhaps. You know, the ones that
we bailed out the corporations. We
bailed out those CEOs, Governor, that are making.
Yeah. Okay, let's let the governor respond.
Well, I agree with that, but I mean, the entrepreneur, the person that's slightly over that $250,000 threshold, that are creating 70% of the jobs in Virginia and probably nationally, the small business guy. I don't see why we layer more punitive taxes on them when they're the ones that are creating the jobs. You layer more taxes, you're going to have less jobs.
What about $1 million?
I'm just not in favor of raising taxes at all. And look, Republicans and Democrats are at fault for this debt and this deficit. It's been years and years of overpromising and under-delivering and not having the courage to be fiscally responsible the way Americans run their business. And now the bills are due. And I think the worst thing to do is raise taxes, increase the debt ceiling, and just continue the irresponsibility that we've had at the federal government. Governors can't do that, and the federal government should.
But, Governor, do you see, after the elections in November, Obama negotiated with Republicans to extend the tax cuts?
Yes.
There were a lot of Democrats that did not want to see him extend the cuts on the top earners.
I agree.
He did it. In an effort to try to get other things passed, including a payroll tax, including the START treaty, and including ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You have to think that was all part of it. To Jeffrey's point, I happen to agree with you. I want to keep taxes low. But the federal government has responsibilities that surpass state governments. They have to fight wars. The federal safety net has to be constructed and executed at the federal level. From a fairness standpoint, if you're trying to win votes in the Senate and the House, to Mika's point, Najo's point, and others on the show, raising the threshold for taxing at $1 million, if we're going to be critical, and you agree with Jeffrey, that going after some of these corporate CEOs and perhaps the corporate welfare, if that's fair, is it not also fair to maybe say to those earning $1 million or $2 million or more, you're going to have to pay a little more in taxes. We're going to lower maybe the corporate rate and keep your investment rates at a certain level. But it's only fair if we're asking middle class and lower class Americans to pay a little more in taxes, to give up a little Medicare and Social Security to pay our debt. Is that not fair?
Well, Harold, I don't think the question is what's fair. It's what's good economic policy. And I think from Kennedy to Reagan to what Chris Christie and I and other governors are doing, you raise taxes, you're going to get less economic development and less jobs. And that's why I don't support it. Have the guts to cut spending and be honest about entitlements. If we don't do entitlement reform, we're never going to get there. We're going to be in debt for a long time.
Joe.
So Governor, let me ask you about fairness, tax fairness. And maybe this is a way that Republicans and Democrats can come together. Because we already have the two sides saying, you know, Barack Obama saying we're going to raise taxes, Republicans saying we're not.
Right.
They've got to meet somewhere. Do we maybe go at it like Ronald Reagan went at it in '86 when Don Regan came to him as Treasury Secretary and said, Mr. President, you know that the top 10 heads of corporations in America pay less in taxes than your secretary. Reagan was shocked. They tried to make the code more fair.
Percentage. Right.
Now we find out that actually everybody's secretary in America probably is paying more in taxes than General Electric. one of our parent companies.
Or Warren Buffett.
Or Warren Buffett,
As he said.
who brags about paying 14% in taxes because he's got all the tax lawyers and all the accountants. And, I mean, we're just stunned by some of the tax advantages that this president passed even that helps millionaires and billionaires and businesses. Is that a way maybe that we can come together?
I think
tax fairness and close these loopholes, raise more money for the government?
I think that may be the middle ground of some wholesale tax restructuring. There have been many that have advocated the flat tax or the fair tax or making sure we tax more consumption as opposed to punitive taxes on income and the wealth-creating activities. I think that may be the way to be able to get there. But it's going to take a lot of guts because you're going to put a lot of accountants and tax lawyers out of business if you have a flat or fair tax.
Let's hope so. Bob's for jobs.
Bob's for jobs.
And you are for jobs. And I think that is something we can all agree on.
Totally.
That I find is interesting that you're doing.
So Bob's for jobs. We commended you. We thought it was. We thought Washington.
You flattered me calling me Elvis. That was great.
You were Elvis. You were the Elvis. At the time, you were ahead of your time talking about jobs when everybody else.
You were
was
just on message.
Talking about
others
ideology.
were not.
Mm-hmm. But what's the job situation right now in Virginia?
Joe, that's been our top priority, getting people back to work, getting them access to the American dream, take care of their families, reducing reliance on government is the top priority. We've gone from 7.2 to 6.4% over the last year. We're third lowest east of the Mississippi, about eighth lowest in the country. We've still got a long way to go. 250,000 Virginians out of work. It's still a tragedy that's painful for us. So we've been very aggressive. I got about $100 million in the budget for new economic development programs, job-creating programs, reduced tax and regulations. Opening up trade offices in England, China, India. I'm going to China in about 3 weeks.
You've got 3 trips.
Telling the Virginia story about why they should come and invest in Virginia.
And you, I'm sorry, Mika, what were you saying?
I'm just looking at your schedule, and it looks like your delegation's going to China at least to 3 different places, and then to Japan. You're bringing your agriculture secretary.
Yes, and Korea.
So being governor these days isn't just about going to the UVA Maryland game and saying nasty things about the Terps. It's a global job.
But it is about VCU Butler.
Exactly.
I was there.
But it's a global challenge, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I say that a lot. I'm not just competing with Maryland and Tennessee and West Virginia and Kentucky anymore, who are here to compete, or Texas. We're competing against India, China, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, that are being very aggressive, flirting with capitalism, attracting Western capital in record numbers. We've lost a lot of jobs offshore, particularly in Southern Virginia. We've had chronic double-digit unemployment. So I want to go tell the Virginia story. We're a right-to-work state. We've got great universities. We've got limited tax and regulatory policies. I think looking another CEO in the eye and say, you need to come to Virginia, and here's why, is important.
Jeffrey Sachs was talking before about how states compete with each other.
Yes.
And I think one of the great tragedies, and I've said it before, driving through New England, you look at shuttered factories from Connecticut up to Rhode Island. It's just a terrible situation. Massachusetts, but one state that you told me also had a low unemployment, New Hampshire.
Yes.
And the New Hampshire story is, of course, that they're a low-tax state that brings in business from the outside. I asked Bob Riley one time, how do you guys get Mercedes plants in Alabama instead of, say, Connecticut? He said, well, it's pretty easy. Less taxes and a better work environment. I mean, in the end, when you're trying to attract jobs to America, is that what it comes down to?
Joe,
work
I think
environment?
you're right on, which is back to the point where I was defensive of a low-tax policy, is low taxes and low regulation. Right-to-work laws are probably the best selling point that I've got in Virginia. It's what Texas and some other southern states have, and I think that's why they've been able to attract jobs.
Given your focus on China, I just wonder if you have any thoughts on Jon Huntsman.
Well, he was a fine ambassador. I think former governors are going to make the best candidates for the Republican nomination. He's certainly one of them. He's not to be discounted, but it's wide open. I tell you, at this point, we got a lot of talented people.
I don't even know where that came from. Your obsession with Jon Huntsman.
I saw a profile on him this morning. No, I watched a profile that a local affiliate did on him this morning. I thought it was really interesting. In fact, we might roll a soundbite later.
You think he's going to jump in?
Yes.
Are you doing this? Is this Helen Reddy thing again?
No.
Because I'm fine with it.
You want to go over this again?
No, I'm great with it. We just got Bob's for jobs
here.
Who's
always ultimately right? I mean, seriously. Governor, thank you very much. I'm sorry about Joe.
Governor, thanks a lot. We appreciate it.
Thank you for being on the show.
Republicans ought to look at this guy.
I'm looking.
You got to look at this guy nationally. I mean, he's
not a Republican, but I'm looking. Coming up, we'll take it. Excuse me? He's what?
I said he's a stud in politics.
Okay.
Republicans ought to watch
Oh,
it.
right.
He's
I just
Elvis.
wanted to make
so
sure
you're Elvis.
that I heard.
Harold, somehow you have even made us feel
Correctly.
uncomfortable.
It's awkward. Coming up.
And that's not easy.
Yeah.
I normally don't do that, so this is a good thing. This is a good thing.
Yeah.
It is.
All right, an exclusive first look at this week's cover of Time magazine coming up. But first, she says Paul Ryan's budget plan is a, quote, death trap for seniors. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz will be here. Also, former U.S. Comptroller General David Walker will be here. We'll be right back.